When people think about the debate on whether alien life exists or not, many think of science fiction or conspiracy theories. In reality, there is actual theory on the subject, which, yes, much of science fiction pulls from and contributes to, but it is not the only genre which theorizes on the subject. Astronomy and biology papers, and even religious and philosophical teachings from antiquity and modern day do too. There was a lot of excitement about space in the 1900s. Writing in that century, Dr. Michael Crow, a PhD in the history of science, said, "It is a widespread assumption that the extraterrestrial life debate began only in our century. Historical research shows that this characterization badly misrepresents the situation. Focusing on the ancient ideas of the subject, in no case was it ever a matter of little green men living in a galaxy far, far away. They didn't even have a conception of what a galaxy is. But what they did teach is remarkable for their time, regardless of whether it seems like what the movies show or even whether it is considered a proper theory of extraterrestrial life. Consider, for example, what the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus said. There are infinite worlds, both like and unlike this world of ours. For the atoms, being infinite in number, are born far out into space." Commenting on this, Dr. Crow said, "It would be easy to misunderstand this position. What the atomists were claiming was not that inhabited planets orbit the sun or some other star, but rather that somewhere in space, probably beyond our view, exists another universe comparable to our own, with an inhabited world, like the Earth, at the center." Amazing. Simply amazing that even before our current, more thorough understanding of cosmology was known, there were already philosophers speculating on the existence of other worlds with life. And he was not the first to do so either. Leucippus and Democritus were atomists that also suggested there existed life elsewhere. Then later Plutarch speculated on lunar life, that is to say, life that exists within what would have been the observable cosmos for them in ancient days. Now, growing up, the subject of aliens was treated as a sort of gimmick with my friends. It was a thing of sci-fi. It was a thing of fiction. If you actually started seriously suggesting that there were aliens, you might get weird looks. Alien conspiracy theorists were othered. As I'll talk more about later, in Mormonism the subject of aliens is brought up in the official scriptures, and this is mocked and satirized in modern media such as in the Book of Mormon musical. The Greeks also had their share of taking this subject lightly. A 2nd century Greek man by the name of Lucian wrote a satirical book called A True History, which was a lovely book to read, by the way. I highly recommend it. It is widely considered the oldest sci-fi book ever written. Complete with critiques against philosophers and their schools of thought, he also jabbed at all the stories that cropped up based on the Odyssey, wherein the author affirmed with much surety that their tale was completely true and all the voyages transpired exactly as described. Lucian, on the other hand, told us nothing in his book is true, and then began to tell the tale of when he took a crew and set sail. A strong wind caught his ship and took it all the way up to the moon, which apparently was populated just the same as any Mediterranean island. The king of the moon welcomed them and quickly enlisted their help in a war against the people of the sun, over who got to colonize the morning star, which we know as the planet Venus. Lucian wrote, "The king of the inhabitants of the sun, Phaethon, said King Endymion, king of the moon, has been at war with us for a long time now. Once upon a time I gathered together the poorest people in my kingdom and undertook to plant a colony on the morning star, which was empty and uninhabited. Phaethon, out of jealousy, thwarted the colonization, meeting us halfway at the head of his dragoons. At that time we were beaten, for we were not a match for them in strength, and we retreated. Now, however, I desire to make war again and plant the colony." Despite Lucian affirming his story was fiction, it was very much within the realm of the science of his day to suggest that people could live on the sun. You already know that the Greeks knew the Earth was round and very large. Eratosthenes also measured the sun's diameter to be 27 times larger than the Earth's. In reality, it is 107 times, but whatever. So it's not so strange that, with limited info about its hospitality, they thought that people could live on it too. I will come to Lucian's defense because your own reaction might be to justifiably say that the idea of people living in such inhospitable environments as the vacuum of the moon, the plasma of the sun, or the hellscape of Venus is ridiculous, but the time was not long past that we didn't understand the nature of these astronomical bodies sufficiently to make such an assertion about its ridiculousness. Now, I won't insinuate that every Greek subscribed to these ideas. Plato and Aristotle, for example, opposed the ideas of the atomists and likely would not have agreed with their speculations on life on other worlds. For the most part, continuing in Western classic history, Catholic fathers mostly opposed the ideas of extraterrestrial life. Augustine criticized the Stoic idea of successive worlds, where this world ends but another arises that will have life on it once again. Albertus Magnus and Thomas Aquinas, having adopted the Aristotelian model of things, also opposed the idea of many worlds like the Earth. This didn't last forever, though, as Dr. Crow wrote. Etienne Tempier, the Bishop of Paris, issued a condemnation of doctrines that seemed to set limits to God's power. One of the propositions condemned was that the first cause, God, cannot make many worlds. This condemnation opened the door to speculation about other worlds. The Copernican revolution also helped open the door to more speculation about extraterrestrial life, because after understanding that the Earth revolves around the Sun and not vice versa, they were able to also discover that other stars were suns of their own respective stellar systems, many of which have exoplanets orbiting them, which might just be similar to Earth. Must I prove that the scriptures of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as well as some of her prophets, strongly support the theorized existence of extraterrestrial life? I suppose I do, because I am amazed to occasionally meet members of the Church who have never heard of it. And I suppose that I ought to, because it provides crucial context for understanding my spiritual journey. And I must admit, it is a fascinating subject in and of itself. Scriptures record God having said, "And worlds without number have I created, and I also created them for mine own purpose. And by the Son I created them, which is mine only begotten. And the first man of all men have I called Adam, which is many. But on the account of this earth and the inhabitants thereof give I unto you. For behold, there are many worlds that have passed away by the word of my power, and there are many that now stand, and innumerable are they unto man. But all things are numbered unto me, for they are mine, and I know them." If that is not enough to surmise, as it was not for a friend of mine who I shared this with only a couple of weeks after his baptism as a new member of the church, I offer the following more explicit one, where Joseph Smith said, "That by him, and through him, and of him, the worlds are and were created, and the inhabitants thereof are begotten sons and daughters unto God." The doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as I understand it, is that God is a divine man with a physical body. Joseph Smith said, "The Father has a body of flesh and bones as tangible as man's. The Son also." Joseph Smith appealed to the Bible to show this. "The Scriptures inform us that Jesus said, As the Father hath power in himself, even so hath the Son power." To do what? Why, what the Father did. The answer is obvious, in a manner to lay down his body and take it up again. With that in mind, it is no stretch to see that a physical God would, of necessity, exist within a space-time continuum. Now, I don't say within the space-time continuum of our universe, because there is historical disagreement among leaders of the Church as to whether God lives in this universe at all. Elder James Talmage, for example, was of the opinion that the place where God resided existed in some alternative plane of existence, and that we should never expect to discover it via our telescopes. But if God is a living being, and one that lives well beyond the earth, that technically makes him example number one of extraterrestrial life spoken of in the scriptures. This amusing image is one I've seen circulate the internet on occasion, giving very explicit quotations from Joseph Smith and his successor within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints denomination of Mormonism, Brigham Young. You'll notice that their ideas about extraterrestrial life here is not unlike Lucian's, because even in the 1800s, they were still ignorant as to the inhospitability of the sun and moon. "The inhabitants of the moon," said Joseph Smith, "are more of a uniform size than the inhabitants of the earth, being about 6 feet in height. They dress very much like the Quaker style, and are quite general in style or the one fashion of dress. They live to be very old, coming generally near 1,000 years. Following in his footsteps, Brigham Young stated, "So it is with regard to the inhabitants of the sun. Do you think it is inhabited? I rather think it is. Do you think there is any life there? No question of it. It was not made in vain. It was made to give light to those who dwell upon it, and to other planets, and so will this earth when it is celestialized." One Reverend Thomas Dick was a contemporary of Joseph Smith who theorized about life on other worlds, and even went so far as to suggest how many people might live on the other planets and moons of our solar system. This is, of course, before we were aware of how inhospitable they were. It may have been the writings of Mr. Dick himself that made Joseph ponder these questions. At least we know that his books were readily available in Joseph's area. Why, even since ancient days, is there a general propensity to treat ideas about extraterrestrial life with satire or scorn? As I mentioned before, Lucian was writing a satire at the end of the day, and Joseph Smith's teachings were similarly satirized in the Book of Mormon musical. It's consistent throughout history, but significant in some way. It might be a mockery of those who hold myth too closely as reality. For example, when significantly less scientifically speculative, the idea, for example, that there might be microbial life in the below-surface ocean of Europa is met with fascination and excitement by most rather than satire. The satire is possibly used as a way to cope with or conceal the existential dread of the universe not being anthropocentric. In the case of Mormonism, it may have to do with the fact that positive assertions are made about extraterrestrial life despite the current lack of positive empirical evidence. To one who did not consider the scriptures about it as a valid source of truth, they would consider this idea that the celestial world is a physical world more akin to science fiction, a suggestion of what might be rather than what definitely is. Nevertheless, as with any theory about extraterrestrial life, to be sound it must provide justification for itself, by way of an answer to the Fermi paradox. This is the paradox put forward by Enrico Fermi, a contributor of the Manhattan Project. Some years after the war in Los Alamos, he presented the question to his peers, asking why there is no empirical evidence of extraterrestrial life on other worlds, despite the high likelihood that there would be life thereon. He more or less asked, where is everybody? Solutions to it abound in serious astronomy and science fiction alike, and in our presently relevant case, religious belief. Brigham Young said, why cannot we behold all things in space? Because there is a curtain dropped, which makes them out of sight to us. Why cannot we behold the inhabitants in Kolob, or the inhabitants in any of those distant planets? For the same reason, because there is a curtain dropped that interrupts our vision. He justifies the existence of this veil by saying that it preserves the free will of people and lets there be a trial of faith. This essentially posits that God's celestial civilization is an advanced extraterrestrial civilization intentionally obscuring our view of life out in the cosmos. It is interesting to note that Joseph Smith seemed to concur with this view and even provides some further explanation about how communication is governed. In answer to the question, is not the reckoning of God's time, angels' time, prophets' time, and man's time according to the planet on which they reside, I answer yes. But there are no angels who minister to this earth but those who do belong or have belonged to it. And so, even when divine messages are received, we are to assume, in this worldview, that they do not come from the other children of God living upon other worlds, but rather our more immediate cousins, the souls who once lived on this planet. During my time living in Brazil as a missionary, I expressed my fascination for these esoteric ideas to my fellow missionaries, and they pointed out to me the spiritual communication talk by President Spencer Kimball back when he was an apostle and not president. The prophets knew, through the centuries, that not only civilizations come and go, but worlds are born, mature, and die. The scriptures postulate that worlds have gone out of existence through self-destruction, but other worlds have gone on unto perfection, and communication between the higher and the lower is not only possible, but is also in actuality. According to President Kimball, the kind of extraterrestrial civilizations that might attempt communication outside the spiritual kind are the ones that have destroyed themselves for not listening to spiritual communication from God. Scriptures of the second coming of Jesus offer a unique view that is applicable here as well. The scriptures prophesy that our whole world would supposedly be destroyed by plagues from God and infighting, were it not for the pleas of the righteous over the ages, which have guaranteed the so-called days of tribulation to be cut short. Their prayers ensure that the wicked only will be killed, and that Jesus come to elevate the earth to a higher state of being and rule the remaining righteous thereon. This makes the second coming of Jesus a great filter. It stops the advancement of the kind of civilizations that would reach out to the cosmos through non-spiritual communication, but allows the other kind to proceed, the kind that would follow the heavenly regulations set for the matter. Prominent Asian religions of ancient origin with teachings about other worlds with life include Hinduism, Buddhism, and Daoism. Note that not all denominations or groups of these religions, ancient or modern, have such beliefs, nor was knowledge of the teachings under question always widely known among the groups that did have the teaching. The prominence of the teachings will not be focused on here, only a review of what the teachings were will be given. Questions to facilitate the exploration of their beliefs include, what was the cosmological model of the universe, or universes, that the religion believed in, or, in other words, what form did they think the other world or worlds took? What form did they think life on those other worlds took? The Hindu religion has multiple different teachings which may fill criteria of another world with life as set forth, each one presenting a different form in which the world or life on the world takes. Dr. Brian Penn-Praise, a PhD in astronomy and astrophysics with an interest in archaeoastronomy, said, "The earliest Vedic texts describe the universe as having three parts: the earth, the sky, and the heavens. Later Hindu texts, such as the Puranas, describe a physical structure of the universe, in which the locations of the various gods, demons, and spirits are specified in relation to each other. This describes a kind of hierarchy of realms, one above another, in which a variety of living beings find residence. People themselves were also thought to be reincarnated and born into different realms, in accordance with the good or evil they had performed in past lifetimes. In addition to this cosmology or understanding of the structure of the universe, was an understanding of other universes." Quoting from the Bhagavata Purana, an ancient Hindu work, Dr. Penn-Praise said, "Every universe is covered by 7 layers, each 10 times greater than the previous one. There are innumerable universes besides this. Thus, there is this teaching of a kind of multiverse, each with worlds similar to, but greater than Earth and its supposed 7 layers. Dr. Crow explained in A History of the Extraterrestrial Life debate what Stoic philosophers believed concerning other worlds with life. His article used the term plurality of temporally successive worlds, which similarly describes the last Hindu idea of the form which other worlds with life took. For the Hindus, just as people are reincarnated after their death, the earth itself has a cosmological cycle of death and rebirth. Thus, in this teaching, the worlds are not separated by space, but rather by time, one being after the other in an endless cycle. This idea engages in another alien life-related dialogue, that of the Great Filter. A great filter being a theorized explanation for why life on other worlds is not detected using scientific instruments and methods. The assumption in such theories being that some consistent type of destruction event has filtered the life on other worlds away. Buddhism grew out of ancient Hinduism, having in it a reactionary teaching to Hinduism's reincarnation cycle. And I apologize in advance to anything I get wrong about the Buddhist view. Ancient Buddhists shared with Hinduism a belief in a hierarchy of realms, but believed in additional worlds above those the Hindus taught of, coming to a total of 10 worlds, this being termed the teaching of the 10 worlds. It is important to note, however, that while ancient Buddhists believed that people on Earth after death were born in a higher or more enlightened life state depending on one's actions, later Mahayana Buddhist writings taught that such an enhanced and enlightened life state was achievable in this life as a state of mind. The first time I learned about Daoism proper was in studying its conceptions of other worlds just a couple of years ago. Ironic, given my time living in China, but so it was. Though not part of the original Taoist teachings found in the Tao Te Ching, Zhuangzi, or other founding books, Taoism eventually developed a belief in other worlds in which people could live after death. The form these realms take is a hierarchy of realms including heavens related to yang and an underworld related to yin. If a person does not develop immortality, then their soul would go to the underworld after death. But if they do develop immortality, then they would live in a different realm. Sometimes this is the mythical Peng Lai Xian Dao, or Peng Lai Immortal Island. Sometimes Mount Kunlun, but sometimes it is considered separate from Earth. According to Dr. Fabrizio Purgadio, a leading scholar in Taoist studies, around the 2nd century BCE, the idea of the 9 heavens, Jiutian, originated, seeing as 9 horizontal sectors of space, corresponding to the Earth, and 8 directions and complementing the 9 continents, Jiuzhou, on Earth. He went on to say that new representations of the celestial domain emerged after Shanqing and Lingbao revelations. The 32 heavens of Lingbao are arranged horizontally and are centered on the Grand Veil, Da Luo, the highest celestial domain, also called Yu Du Shan, or Mountain of the Jade Capital. Stepping away from religious Taoism to its pop culture influence, modern-day Chinese xianxia fantasy novels often incorporate heavenly courts and realms occupied by immortals. In Heaven Official's Blessing, for example, the heavenly court is an island in the sky that floats above the clouds. But in other depictions, such as Gun's world in A Will Eternal, I Shall See the Heavens, and Renegade Immortal, the heavenly realms are actually other planets out among the stars, making them more akin to what we would be familiar with as extraterrestrial life. As of when I am making this video, the existence of extraterrestrial life has not been proven via scientific data. However, in recent years, 3 prospects have arisen. Mars, Europa, Enceladus, and exoplanet K2-18b. It is possible that microbial life once existed on the surface of Mars. We know that Mars once had large oceans and thus more favorable conditions for life than it currently has. In 2025, NASA's Perseverance rover discovered a potential biosignature, essentially a chemical compound that is usually only produced under conditions of intense heat, acid, or by life. Seeing as it is an area of Mars that would not have been in heat, even all those millions of years ago that the sample dates to, and that there is no evidence of acid in the area, the possibility is a very real one that the sample represents a remnant left behind by Martian microbes that have long since gone extinct. Europa is an ice moon of the planet Jupiter. While its surface is made of ice by virtue of how far away from the sun it is, it has a massive liquid ocean underneath that surface, warmed by tidal forces the moon experiences from Jupiter. Being one of the places liquid water exists in the solar system outside of Earth, it is again another prime candidate for the existence of life. Additionally, the tidal forces from Jupiter might cause it to have underwater thermal vents, which, analogous events on Earth, were the source of energy for the earliest microbial organisms in our planet. Well, they are still sources of energy for many microbes. Anyways, we eagerly await the Europa Clipper probe, which will arrive there in 2030 to tell us more. Enceladus is an ice moon of the planet Saturn. Like Europa, it has an underwater ocean. However, Enceladus has enormous geysers, where its liquid water is spewed out into space, in which have been detected organic molecules, and in which we may yet detect microbes. K2-18b is an exoplanet located in a stellar system 124 light-years away from Earth. Ways of interpreting the data collected on it vary widely, but there is a possibility that, aside from being in its star's habitable zone, it may have water oceans and atmospheric conditions suitable for microorganisms to live. One way of interpreting new data collected on it in 2025 is that it might have dimethyl sulfide in its atmosphere, the presence of which, though having other potential explanations, would also potentially be explained by the presence of certain kinds of life. Notice that in each of these cases, the life in question would not be very complex, nothing more than microbes, which indeed was all that existed on Earth for the majority of its history. Which brings us back to our discussion of the Fermi paradox. In our collection of the data, our only prospects are of nothing more than single-celled or at least small microbial life, which we should not expect to be reaching out to us via radio or other communication anytime soon. If there is no intentional obscurement keeping us from finding advanced extraterrestrial life, then the assumption would be that we are exceptionally rare in the universe, and there must be a reason for its rarity, which has been hypothesized under the name of the Great Filter, which is some threshold that must be passed in order for complex and advanced life to exist, advanced enough to reach out to the stars, to attempt communication, that is. It is possible that the Great Filter is in the rising of life at all, in which case we would find very little life of any kind in the universe. It is possible that it is in the transition from microbial life to larger complex life, or anyway on the scale of complexity up to us. And some suggest, as we have seen in our review of Mormonism and Hinduism, that the filter may yet lay in our future, that we are perhaps doomed to some self or other kind of destruction, a test, if you will, that other life out there advanced like us have failed to avoid. Given that extremophile microorganisms can survive in conditions that would make larger complex organisms go extinct, and given the compositions and positioning of the many exoplanets we have discovered, I submit as my opinion that if life is commonly arising at all, it seldom advances to be very large and complex, and even more rarely advances to be as complex and capable of reaching out to the stars as us. Many questions still exist not answered here on the subject of ancient religious teachings on other worlds with life, such as the prevalence of these teachings in the religion and the existence of such teachings among religions beyond those addressed here. Many religions had a hierarchy of worlds as part of their cosmology. Other ideas about the forms which other worlds took included the plurality of temporally successive worlds, and perhaps most similar to what much of pop culture portrays nowadays. But rarer in ancient religions was the belief in the existence of other worlds just like Earth. The residents of the hierarchical realms ranged from gods, angels, and devils to the souls of the deceased people of Earth, while the residents of successive and alternate worlds were usually people just like the people of Earth. The idea of extraterrestrial life is ancient. Even before the current cosmology of the universe with exoplanets in abundance was known, there were already religions and philosophers speculating on the existence of other worlds with life, and I think that's beautiful. Because if thought on alien life could arise in multiple eras and places on Earth, then who knows? Maybe out there is another world with life that's also contemplating the same thing, making them not so alien to us after all.